The moment the wine glass shattered across the marble floor, Mira Leston felt her pulse leap into her throat. Her hand trembled as she stared down at the dark red stain spreading like a wound between the perfectly set tableware. It wasn't the spill that scared her, it was the expression on the man sitting across from the blonde woman in blue. He looked up at Mira with eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent years trying to hold his world together with fading strength. And the woman beside him looked startled, blinking in confusion as if she couldn't quite understand why the waitress assigned to their table was the same woman who'd been paid handsomely to ruin their blind date. Ripple of love, if you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, like, comment, share, and subscribe to keep the stories alive. Mira had never meant for things to escalate this quickly. She'd been told to create chaos, to embarrass the blonde guest, to make sure the dinner ended in disaster. It was supposed to be a simple sabotage job, the kind she had learned to take without questions because rent didn't wait, and life hadn't given her the luxury to be picky. Yet as she looked at the man, Soren Hale, the quietly powerful single dad CEO whose name she had only learned earlier that afternoon, she felt something shift painfully inside her. This wasn't a man who needed his life broken further. This was a man who had cracks deep enough to swallow him. The restaurant around them shimmered with warm daylight filtering through chandelier prisms, casting flecks of gold across linen-draped tables. Servers glided like silent dancers, the gentle hum of late-afternoon chatter blending with soft strings playing from hidden speakers. Everything looked serene, almost cinematic, yet Mira felt like she was drowning under the weight of her own heartbeat. Her life had been spiraling long before today. Ever since her younger brother had disappeared into the foster system without warning, Mira had worked double shifts to hire a lawyer who'd promised to help her get custody back. But bills buried those promises. Survival swallowed hope. And desperation made even terrible offers feel like lifelines. So when a wealthy socialite approached her with money thicker than moral dilemmas, Mira agreed to sabotage a blind date meant for the socialite's ex-boyfriend, the same man now sitting in front of her, unknowingly tied to her guilt. Soren Hale didn't look like anyone's villain. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something meaningful from ashes, yet the shadows beneath his eyes hinted at sleepless nights. Mira had overheard other waiters whispering earlier about how he had raised his 8-year-old son alone since his wife's accident. They said he almost never dated. They said today was a rare moment of courage for him. And now Mira had ruined it. The blonde woman, Elora, dabbed her dress with a napkin, still startled but trying to stay composed. She looked like someone who wanted things to work, but whose eyes held a strange distance, as if she were forcing herself to be present. Soren looked at Mira again, but not with anger. There was only tired confusion, and something akin to empathy, as though he sensed this wasn't just a clumsy mistake. Mira forced herself to breathe, stepping back as apologetically as she could before turning away. Her mind spun. She needed to stay focused. Do the job, get the money, save her brother. That had been the plan. But the more she glimpsed Soren Hale, how gently he leaned toward Elora to ensure she was okay, how he carried an awkward tension like someone unfamiliar with being cared for, the more her conscience cracked. When her supervisor scolded her in the hallway for being sloppy, Mira barely heard him. Her thoughts kept drifting to Soren. Why did he feel familiar? Why did his sadness feel like an echo of her own? By the time she returned to the dining room, Elora had stepped away to take a call, leaving Soren alone at the table. Sunlight glowed softly across him, giving him a warmth he probably didn't feel internally. He didn't look up when she approached to refill his water, but she sensed the heaviness in his posture. She wondered what burden he carried beneath that tailored suit. She wondered if this date had been a moment of fragile hope, one she had been paid to shatter. Soren had spent years avoiding the idea of love. Everyone in his corporate world saw him as a prize or an opportunity. After his wife's death, every attempt to date felt like a negotiation rather than a chance to heal. People wanted the CEO, the millionaire, the symbol, not the father who still woke at night from dreams of failing his son. Today's blind date had been arranged by someone from a support group for grieving parents. Soren had agreed reluctantly, thinking maybe, just maybe, he deserved to try again. Mira felt her chest tighten as she watched him. He looked lonely in a way that made her own loneliness feel seen. A strange warmth rose through her, a dangerous one, because she had no right to feel anything toward him. She tried to leave the table quickly, but Soren finally looked up. His gaze held depth, exhaustion, yes, but also gentleness, an unspoken understanding that she was fighting a silent battle he couldn't see. It shook her. She turned away before the emotion in her face could betray her. The sabotage plan continued, though her heart resisted. She spilled a spoon. She dropped a tray loudly nearby. She brought the wrong dishes twice. Small disruptions, designed to frustrate. Elora grew increasingly distant after returning from her call. Soren tried to remain patient, but Mira could see his disappointment growing, not at her, but in the sinking realization that maybe he had hoped too much out of today. And then, unexpectedly, everything collapsed into a truth Mira hadn't prepared for. She overheard Elora in the hallway arguing on the phone. Elora hadn't wanted to come. She was being pressured by someone, Myra's employer, to attend and make the date appear serious. The plan was to push Soren into a rebound relationship for reasons Mira couldn't fully understand. Someone had wanted him vulnerable and distracted. But Elora didn't want to be part of manipulation. They were both being used. Mira felt sick. She wasn't ruining a date, she was reinforcing someone else's trap. As she returned to the table, her steps felt heavier. Her conscience felt louder. Soren looked up again, sensing something unsettled in her expression. Elora returned a moment later, her face pale with conflicted emotion. And then, without warning, Mira snapped internally. She couldn't do this. She couldn't hurt someone who already seemed to carry enough brokenness. She approached the table stiffly, her hands pressed against the crisp linen. For a moment, no one spoke. Elora watched her with cautious eyes. Soren waited, calm but curious. Mira felt her voice tremble as she apologized, not for the spills, but for everything invisible beneath them. She didn't confess fully, but in her trembling apology, in her expression weighted with guilt, something unspoken reached Soren. It wasn't the words. It was the vulnerability of someone who had been cornered by life more than by poor choices. Elora gently excused herself soon after, leaving Soren at the table with a lingering uncertainty. When she exited the restaurant, she passed Mira and whispered something soft, something that sounded like gratitude. Soren remained seated long after Elora left. Mira tried to avoid looking his way, but during a slow hour when the guests dwindled and sunlight stretched long across the room, he approached the service stand quietly. He didn't accuse her. Didn't demand explanations. He simply asked if she was okay. And that question nearly broke her. It was the first time in years someone had asked without expecting anything in return. As the day shifted into late afternoon, Soren and Mira exchanged a few quiet, hesitant words. Nothing flirtatious. Nothing inappropriate. Just two people sharing fragments of their struggles, his fears for his son, her fight for her brother, their mutual exhaustion with pretending to be strong when their hearts felt fragile. It wasn't romance. It wasn't planned. It was connection, gentle, unexpected, and painfully real. By the time Soren left the restaurant, Mira felt both lighter and heavier. She had ruined his date, yes, but she had also witnessed him open up in a way he probably hadn't intended. And something inside her shifted when he gave her a nod that carried warmth rather than resentment. 2 days later, when he returned, not for business, not for another date, but simply to ask how she was doing, Mira realized life had quietly rearranged their paths. He wasn't looking for perfection. He wasn't searching for a polished partner. He was drawn to sincerity, to struggle, to authenticity that matched his own. As their connection deepened over the following weeks, each encounter painted a new layer of healing. He shared stories of his son, of the nights